Hi everybody, welcome to Storytime with Gma. Another story for my two favorite grandbabies, Fox and Daisy, and any other little G babies that want to listen. So we've started reading from the Magic Carpet book. Is a book of multiple stories, and you can see from the picture that there's lots of children all in different clothings and ethnic backgrounds. Even looks like there's Paul Bunyan and a princess castle. So we have already read the first story, which was about the lion and how three brothers tease their younger brother. So now we're going to read a story called Donkey Fever. So Donkey Fever. Let's see if we can get it just right. So Pinocchio was a wooden marionette who came to life. Like many boys, he did not enjoy studying, so he ran away to the country of nothing but play with his friend Candlewick. All went well for 5 months, and then came a horrible surprise. What was the surprise? Well, when Pinocchio woke up one morning and started to stretch his head, he found, just guess what he found. You know that our Pinocchio had very thin ears, so tiny that you could hardly see them. Just imagine how shocked he was then when he touched his head and found that his ears had grown until they seemed a foot long. He rushed to find a mirror, but he couldn't find one, so he poured some water into a washbowl instead. And there in the water, he saw two long, magnificent donkey ears. Oh, how sorrowful and ashamed our poor Pinocchio felt. He sobbed in despair. He screamed. He knocked his head against the wall. But the harder he cried, the more his ears grew and grew and grew. Hair began to sprout on their tips. Hearing his heart-rending cries, a dormouse who lived on the first floor hurried into the room. Seeing the marionette in such a state, she asked anxiously, "What is the matter with you, my dear little fellow lodger?" "Oh, Mrs. Dormouse, I'm very sick, and it frightens me. Do you know how to count a pulse?" "Perhaps." "Then see if I have a fever." The Dormouse took Pinocchio's wrist and held it in her paw. In a few moments she said, "My little friend, I'm sorry, but I have some bad news for you." "What can it be?" cried Pinocchio. I wonder what it could be. Let's see. "You have a terrible fever," said the Dormouse. "What kind of fever is it?" "The donkey fever, Miss Dormouse." "I don't know what donkey fever is," said Pinocchio, who really did know all too well. "Then I'd better explain. In 2 or 3 hours you will turn into a donkey, a real live donkey." "Oh, what shall I do? What shall I do?" cried Pinocchio, pulling wildly at his ears. "Dear boy," said Dormouse, "what can you do? You surely know what the law says. Those boys who don't like to study, who hate school, and spend all their time in play, always end at last by turning into little donkeys." "Do they really?" Of course they do. And now, crying won't do you a bit of good. You should have stopped and thought sooner. Oh, but it wasn't my fault, truly. It was all Candlewick's fault. And who may Candlewick be? A boy I know. Oh, I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to get my lessons and make the good fairy proud of me. But Candlewick told me, in the country of nothing but play, nobody studies. We can just play all day long from morning till night. And why did you listen to a good-for-nothing scamp like that? Oh, why? Oh, Mrs. Dormouse, because I am a stupid, ungrateful marionette. And if I weren't such a worthless creature, I'd never have left my good fairy, who did so much for me. And by this time, I would have turned into a real boy, like lots of other marionettes. He started to go out the door, but remembered his donkey ears just in time, and being ashamed to have anyone see him, he made a cotton cap and put it on, pulling it way down over his ears, and then set out to hunt for Candlewick. But Candlewick did not seem to be around anywhere. Pinocchio went up and down each street to all the theaters everywhere. At last he went to Candlewick's house and knocked. "Who's there?" called Candlewick from inside. "Pinocchio." "Well, wait a minute. I'll open the door." Companions in misery. Pinocchio waited and waited. After a long time the door opened, and Pinocchio saw his friend had on a cap too, pulled down over his ears. Pinocchio looked at the cap and felt a little better. Candlewick is in trouble too, he thought. I'll bet he has donkey fever just like me. But Pinocchio pretended not to notice anything. "How are you today, Candlewick?" he asked in the most cheerful tone in the world. "As happy as a mouse and cheese." "Cross your heart?" "Why should I tell a fib?" "Maybe I shouldn't ask, but why are you wearing that cap?" "Oh, the doctor thought I'd better wear it. I hurt my knee." "But Pinocchio, why are you wearing a great big cap?" "Well, the doctor told me to. I hurt my toe, you see." "Oh, poor Pinocchio." "Oh, poor Candlewick." Then for a long time the boys didn't say anything at all. At last Pinocchio sort of whispered, "Pull up your cap just a little, won't you?" "Nothing doing. Will you?" Nothing doing. You see, well, one of my ears hurts pretty badly. One of mine does too. "Oh, it does? Which one?" "Both." "And you?" "Both." "Have we both got the same thing?" "I'm afraid so." "Do something for me, Candlewick." "Of course." "Let me look at your ears." "Well, all right, but let me see yours first." "No, after you." "All right then," said the marionette. "Let's make a bargain. Let's both take off our caps at the same time." "All right, I'm willing." "Ready then?" And Pinocchio began to count. 1, 2, 3. And at 3 both boys pulled their caps off and threw them up to the ceiling. And then, realizing that the same dreadful thing had happened to both of them, They burst into shouts of laughter. They laughed until they were weak. And suddenly, Candlewick stopped laughing and staggered, turning white. He cried, "Help me! Help me, Pinocchio! What's the matter?" "Oh dear, I can't stand up any longer." "I can't either," cried Pinocchio. And at that moment, they fell on hands and knees and began to run around the room on all fours. And as they were running, their arms turned into legs, their faces grew long, and their bodies became all hairy. What used to be hands were now hooves. But the very worst moment of all for those wretched boys was when each one felt a tail whisking behind him. Sad and ashamed, they tried to speak instead of sobs and cries. However, the only sounds they could make were donkey sounds. Hee-haw, hee-haw. If you were worried about Pinocchio, you will be happy to know that he finally learned his lesson. Yes, after many adventures, he did get over his donkey fever, and he finally became, instead of a marionette, a real boy. Well, wasn't that nice? That was a good story about Pinocchio. I had forgotten he got donkey fever once. But that Pinocchio, he was so mischievous, you had a hard time keeping him together. Okay, so that's a story for now. All right, I will talk to you soon. Gma loves you. Have a good day.